Welcome back, everybody, to our session. Now we have Cristina Voto of the University of Turin, but also of the, what's the pronunciation, Cristina? Vrije University of Amsterdam, is going to talk about between self-perception and automated recognition, archiving non-binarism on the face. Cristina Voto is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Turin, but also professor in semiotics at the University of Tres de Febrero in Buenos Aires. And she's curator of the Biennial of the Moving Image in Buenos Aires. Her academic research focuses on semiotics, design studies, audiovisual cultures, digital arts, future studies, and gender and queer studies, which is the topic I believe she's going to talk about. So, Cristina, the floor is yours for 30 minutes, and then we will have the discussion.
Okay. Thanks, Antonio. Thanks to the organizer of this symposium. Thanks, Maria Giulia, Massimo, Claudio. I'm going to start, but with a declaration before. What I'm going to present you is like something that we might call a positional presentation. I show you what I'm starting to do at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, because I sincerely like to take advantage of the presence of all of you. So I'm just opening up the black box of my research investigation, because I'm really interested in listening to your commentaries. So be sincere and rude if you need it later. I would appreciate that. So I would start with a quoting from a kind old book, but it's such an interesting one. Actually, it's a collection of radio presentation that Ursula Franklin, the famous scholar, made 34 years ago, and she speaks about technology in a way I'm interested to frame it now today. So technology has built the house in which we all live. The house is continually being extended and remodeled. More and more of human life takes place within its walls, so that today there is hardly any human activity that does not occur within this house. All are affected by the design of the house, by the division of its space, by the location of its doors and walls. Compared to people in earlier times, we rarely have a chance to live outside this house. And the house is still changing, is still being built as well as being demolished. So the starting ground of my presentation, and here there is just a video that I'd like to show to you. And it's funny though, because yesterday, no, there is no sound, thanks. Yesterday I've been part of the first group who've been to the water collection, and a piece of the same artist, Tony Orsler, is presented in the collection. So you will see another prototype of the same work of art. So the starting ground of my presentation is understanding that the use of automated face recognition system is rapidly spreading in our society, and that these systems are consistently built on a gender-binary construct and almost never consider individuals who define themselves as non-binary. As a consequence of this type of human-machine interfaces, reinforce existing prejudice about these communities. So, of course, the reflection on binarism as a paradigm in our culture is absolutely interesting and stimulating, especially with you as a semiotician public. But this is not the issue of my presentation, maybe of the next, because, I mean, it's a wide topic. And in what follows, I'm more interested in the problem of the intersection between gender self-perception from a perspective marked by semiotics and a comparison with the process of gender classification as it occurs in automated facial recognition system. And the goal is to set the ground for analyzing the intersection of these two categories or elements, we can say, so self-perceived gender versus machine-classified gender, through an investigation of the current state of art on face recognition technology, focusing on the problem of data archiving. Okay, so within this perspective, my main hypothesis is that non-binary self-perception centers practices and subjectivities while it casts new lights on gender and identity sense-making, the nature of recognition categories, and their significance to the embodiment. Furthermore, considering arts a privileged realm for reversing engineering and reconfiguring patterns towards otherwise neglected latent possibility, and being art also my terrain of research and my terrain of professional labor, I will recall to the displaying of artistic pieces as a power suggestion to what I will present to you. So the framework of my presentation is also the result of an intersection. Since 2020, I'm part of the FACETS group, and within this framework, I've just started a research project toward non-binary space recognition, a critical study on gender and identity to build a more equitable AI at the Vrije University. At the user-centric data program at the Department of Econometrics and Data Sciences. So I'm like the humanist between the scientists. The field ground of the project is to understand that identity is not a fixed ontology, as we all well know in semiotics, but a space of tensions that results from the meaning affect that the intersection, or maybe we can speak about the manipulative experiences of the aspect related to ethnicity, age, class, gender, embeds in the process of identification. So retrieving the lessons also from intersectional feminists, thinking in terms of intersectionality allows to recognize the performative nature of identity, turning this category into a useful tool for mapping out how each identity experience embodies effects of oppression and of privilege. And at the core of both the project at the Vrije University and today's presentation lies the question of gender classification as it occurs in the face recognition system. Although extensive research has been carried out, and even more by the increasingly pervasive use of this technology, I have the sensation, there is no solid investigation on how face recognition algorithms embed visual enactments. And this is the point of my investigation. So the features regulating automated recognition system and data collection of databases with which automated face analysis systems are fed are tied to gender binary representation, and they are being trained to recognize and to react to this specific facial coded visual biometrics, what we might call in semiotic terms as diagrams. In this regard, in face recognition system, gender is treated as a quantitative and verifiable data shaped by the convention of binary phenotypes. And we can thus affirm that automatic face analysis makes computable through a manipulative grid of reading the diagrams of gender identities as a taxonomy discretely separated from the intersection and archived without the user input. Just as an aside, it is worth remembering that automated face analysis system is a term for computer vision method that use machine learning techniques to automate problems related to reading the human face. So it responds to a main goal to measure the human face through two specific tasks, whether simply to detect a face is present, face detection, or to detect a specific individual's face, so face recognition. And a deeper look at the issue reveals that the relationship between face automatic analysis system technology and gender is mutually constitutive, enacted, we might say. This relationship is leading to at least to my perspective, two main consequences. So individuals increasingly encounter representations of gender embedded in technology, and machines are being trained to recognize and to react to relevant traits of human identity, including, of course, gender. So from this positional starting point, I wonder how facial data can enact in our culture. And from this perspective, I am interested in facial archives, such as training facial data sets for machine learning systems, and how they form and inform the recognition of identity. Here is another video that it doesn't matter the sound. So, pivotal body part and extremely signifying in identity making, and therefore in both cognitive and cultural processes, the face acquires a differential epistemic status in our infosphere. Since what Thomas Macho had described as facial society in 1996, so precisely before our iconosphere was replenished with digital faces and artificial faces too, resulting from both human and non-human agencies, today it is possible to identify differential digital mediated forms of modeling, simulating, and archiving concerning the face. So this is a video, 4104 frames, where that it is an attempt at revealing, let's say, the black box of the machine learning model. It results in scenes of human faces deteriorating into environments as part of an, let's say, hallucinated exploration of the farthest edge of the model's latent space, because the video frames are fed through an inverted generative adversarial network pre-trained on a dataset of faces, outputting some latent representation of the input frames. So these latent representation are then pre-passed through the general adversarial network, resulting in manipulated version of the original frame containing elements of both the original footage as well the facial features and textures, reminding the viewer the models of the intended purpose. And I find it's really interesting, this hallucination. So my proposal, though, is to set the basis for a cross-analysis of the visual archiving of facial data through a perspective attending to the minimum effects that intervene in the making identity process, precisely in the intersection of self-perceived gender and machine-classified gender, in dialogue with statistical and informatics frameworks, or at least this is my ambition, and I work hard to try to reach it. So by doing though, I'm designing a methodology aimed at analyzing the meaning effects of the process of facial data archiving on the basis of the following research question that sustain the central argumentation of the project. So, how do facial data archiving affect how we perceive gender identity? And from a slightly different perspective, how the data perception on one's own gender identity is affected by the diffusion of this data? And furthermore, how does the designing of facial data interact with the perception of gender identity? And how does the current reontologization of the word as we know, the enveloping of the word for AI, as stated by Luciano Floridi, for becoming increasingly suitable for artificial intelligence, patterns, space, and sets of the facial data? So starting from these search problems, I aim to understand the process of archiving data for achieving a proposal addressed to, I would hope to, a more fair intelligence system using a methodology grounded on the collaboration between semiotics, digital humanities, and STEAM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And this is because my investigation is within a data science department. The frame in archiving studies started from my deep convincement that technologies that use large sets of facial data can learn from other disciplinary with a long history of addressing similar problems. And archives, as the oldest human attempt to collect social data, social cultural data, are the focus of my presentation. Because archives are institutions that deal primarily with documents and photographs, this lesson, this is another of my hypotheses, best applied to subfields such as the unconstructed data, such as computer vision. So this is an example of, let's say, an interesting view of an archive, which content management is built to allow indigenous community to house their own material using their own protocols. Mukurtu provides a platform for individuals to upload their data, flag sensitive content, and label their preferences for access, use, and circulation, all via strictly controlled protocols. So this is just like an example that I wanted to show to you. And something that I think is really interesting about it is this idea of traditional knowledge levels, which is the big attempt through ethnographic methodology to create labeling feasible with the communities. But let's go to our case. Dealing with facial data archiving means dealing with faces and how we interact information, and how we extract information concerning identity, specifically in my case would be gender identity, from the front surface of the human head. But with a remark, genders are not just performative, as Judy Butler and all other scholars after the diffusion of their theory have stated. My hypothesis is to consider gender as enacted. So gendered culture builds and maintains gendered affordances in which the action possibilities individuals face are normed according to a specific gendered situation, and most often assigned by biological sex. So individuals enact a given gender when they come to perceive the affordances reverse for one gender by the entire culture and respond enacting gendered perception, or maybe we can speak about controlled gender hallucination, citing Claudio Paolucci. Nevertheless, a deep look into our human experience makes us aware that gender is neither binary nor erratic, but it's an interpersonal negotiation between individuals, contexts, and backgrounds. Cultures offered gendered script, which allow us the ability to predict each other's future action, establishing roles and expectations. So, through this perspective, I propose a first frame to focus on the phenomena of the archiving of facial data and the meaning effect that this process produces in the perception of the recognition of identity. And so, for this reason, I will start with 2 points. Of course, a reflection on data that can be intended as situated pieces of information that allow to account for constructed knowledge and are not a given natural representation of pre-existing fact, as, for example, Anna just represented or just showed out before. There is no such thing as raw data, but it's essential to ask questions about the condition under which data embeds information and produce knowledge. They're not just data at all, no? And we can cite, we can quote, Joanna Drucker talking about captcha instead of data. And data, we can say, or at least this is my proposal, are always subject to at least 2 bias levels, historical and representational one. So data collection strategies must intervene before applying sampling, weighting, and other balancing techniques to minimize this bias. Historical bias represents structural, empirical inequities inherent to the society, which are reflected in the data. A machine learning data set produce outcomes reflecting these biases when taken wholesale, while representational data, on the other side, comes from the divergences between the distribution and digitalized input space. And this can result from uneven access to digital tools or sociocultural constraints that prevent digitalization. In this regard, generally speaking, the task of automatic association of abstract concept, as gender is within the machine vision, to visual data is a technical challenge. However, it needs not to focus solely on the performance, but also on interpretability, which is absolutely a semiotic point, regarding the reasoning behind their predictions. Models for automatic abstract concept and visual association mirror a sociocultural cognitive task based on subjective, cultural, and interoceptive processes. But as such, models carry an elevated risk of echoing harmful biases and stereotypes based on prejudice, racism, and other limited word use. The second point, of course, of my investigation is the face and the semiotic of the face as a dynamic dispositive that oscillates between the natural world, the cultural world, and that in this fluctuation, it innervates a network of somatic, cognitive, and communicative relations capable of framing the image par excellence of the human being. And also at the first sight, the face can be thought as a given natural object. A deeper understanding reveals that it's something difficult to grasp. It is shaped by heterogeneous assemblages and it is in continuous transformation. Okay, I go maybe, how much time do I have?
15 minutes.
Okay. Within this viewpoint, it is possible to affirm that even though every face is unique, it is precisely on the frontal surface of the head that facial trends can be established and manipulated, also on the basis of the sociocultural expectation which shape aesthetic models in accordance with parameters of belonging or less to a community. And a turning point, of course, in this conception with concerning the face as a communicative form, where to archiving a sense of belonging has been the development of city and the dense network of mass media that is to be found in every metropolis. I go a little bit fast in this part, and because every one of us is informed about Gelton, we spoke about that before, also composite portraiture, that create for example, the Jewish type in this case, from the statistical averages of the anthropometry of the face according to an essentialist biometrics. And the starting point of the composite photograph is a repetition of shooting and an assembling act that function as a promise against the variance of the human condition. Another example of these averages is the spoken portrait by Alphonse Bertillon, who was convinced that the mastery of the criminal body necessitated a massive campaign of inscription and archiving of the faces into text, the paired verbal description down to a denotative shorthand, which was then linked to a numerical series. First, he combined photographic portraited, anthropometric description, and highly standardized and abbreviated written notes to a single fiche. Second, he organizes this fiche within a comprehensive, statistically based filling system. So Bertillon would go on the own of his system of physical description into a morphological vocabulary that described the variability of human feature, as well as a system of abbreviation to render the vocabulary communicable by telegraph. So, but how do we have to face our iconosphere and where we are all enveloping and reontolization for AI? So in semiotic terms, archiving always implies a re-enunciation through the use of a particular support that preserves data and rescues information from the oblivion by becoming a memorandum. This re-enunciation has its limitation and requires a supplement, which in turn is also mnemonic and informative because it proposes a technique for data collection and the technology for the annotation process. By applying the theory of speech acts and reviewing the Austrian concept of the descriptive fallacy of the language, we can refer to the informational fallacy of the archive. At the same time, the archive also produces knowledge and has performative consequences concerning what and how something is informed and remembered. Within this perspective, and by applying Peircean semiotics, it is possible to affirm that an archive as a sign is something which stands to somebody, a certain criterion that postulates the data to be remembered, for something, a concrete information forged in an experience or an artifact that operates as a mnemonic substitute in some respect of capacity, that is, according to a certain classification. And by applying this semiotic perspective, the archive, intended as a large corpus of data that can be used within a machine learning system, makes sense and produces knowledge when it organizes the computational criterion that removes the collected database from its amorphous storage, engaging it in a computational machine learning operation. This is how I consider archive as an attempt to enunciate sociocultural data, and now I find parallel with the data collection effort in machine learning. Within this viewpoint, archiving can be thought as a meaning process of embracing issues related to patterning as the sociocultural relationship between visibility and invisibility, and labeling as the condition of sayability, we can say, and the condition of power. Nevertheless, at the same time, archives and machine learning datasets are transversed by differential characteristics to the phenomenal and epistemic distance that can exist between the curatorial practice within an archive and the minimally, at least today, supervised labeling within machine learning. And here, I guess, is a wide and absolutely stimulating field of investigation that could be open, and attention of the curatorship of databases as a form of caring and curing the house in which we live, recovering the quotation of Ursula Franklin. So, by following the hypothesis that sustain the informational fallacy of the archives, we can consider training datasets for machine learning system as fallible collection of informative data, collection whose being together is governed by some kind of pertinence and relevance, which define its boundaries and their value, and what they contain and what they exclude. The parallel between collection of facial images, such as those that physiognomy since the 18th century has compiled into collection of silhouettes, and the current data collection efforts in machine learning are interesting in understanding how data inform the face. We can find some tensions between the visible and the invisible in the discourses of the politics of recognition and identification, and at the same time, we can detect some discontinuities in the type of information the face can produce through its digital or artificial archiving. Physiognomy participated in this great cognitive enterprise by cataloging the invisibility of human beings through the visibility of facial features. And the evolution of the technique for visualizing faces through graphic portraits of physiognomy, especially through the development of modern engraving and the designing of specific apparatus, such as the chair that Johann Caspar Lavater designed, made it possible to take a path that would be decisive for centuries to come, namely that of adapting images not only as the object of collecting and cataloging discourses, but also as a visual meta-language in which the visual is cataloged and ordered. And I thank my PI, Massimo Leone, for make this point clear. And one of the most diffuse forms has always been, of course, gender cataloging and ordering. In this regard, from the 18th century physiognomic graphic portraits to contemporary machine learning datasets, we assist in the designing of identity through captation of visual features during the archiving of facial information, like the relation to jaw to cheeks, the prominence of Damon's apple, the relation of nose to the width of the eyes, the relation of the forehead to the hairline, and so on and so forth. And this brings me to the final remark, the final tool that I am interested in this positional, I underline once more, presentation, the one referring to data labeling. Today we refer to this process as a process for identifying raw data and adding one or more meaningful and informative labels. It aims to determine the properties of an object and to provide context from which a machine can learn. And this finally leads me to the last question that are exactly the starting point of the research project. So, does the labeling process make individuals feel more or less included? And how does it create diversity or discrimination? It is possible to avoid identity-based labeling while creative and inclusive and diverse facial archiving. And finally, it is possible to archive information relying with fair data labeling process under uncertainty, that is, in this case, without using identity-referred labels. This is the biographic references, and I thank you for your attention.